So this is going to be fun. I love this kind of stuff. Like I said, the message is a little different because it's not about if you're experiencing guilt or something in your life. It's history. So be like a kid today and put on your imagination goggles. We're going to look at the world back then as we continue this second part of 7 and the 7 letters to the 7 churches from the book of Revelation. Jesus Christ, through John, had him send 7 letters. Now, when you think about the significance of this, it's the early church, the launching pad. It's like when Jesus came into this world, when God came into this world wearing the man coat and wearing flesh, his church, the launching pads, were these 7 cities. And he let each one know what they're doing wrong and what they're doing right. And this would be the rocket that propels the gospel into the future. And why it's relevant to read it now is because just like everything else with God, it's timeless. He wasn't just talking to the churches then. It speaks to the churches now. And more importantly, there are elements of each letter that not only speak to the church, they speak to the individual person about where your heart is. So there's a quick recap as they gave me the slide thing today. I've never used this before. I usually call out for it because I've seen people stand up here and have problems with it. And when I have a piece of technology in my hand and it's not working right, it ceases to be. Because I can fix anything with a hammer, and I have. So I said maybe I shouldn't, but they gave it to me, so let's see if it works. All right. So we're good so far. You're safe. All right. Quick recap. In our series to the 7 letters to the 7 churches, we have to take into account that all those letters were written long ago. They address the needs of us now. I said that already. Christ offers the criticisms and the hope at the end. And as we previously looked at Ephesus, we discovered the vital quality that Jesus requires of his church, that they never, ever, ever lose their first love, their love for him, and continue doing what he called the first works. That is, laboring and reaching the lost out of their love for him, and not just because it's something you do to feel good as being part of a church. So we can take from that lesson that we stand to lose our church if we wane, if we go back and forth in our love to Christ, for our love for Christ as our motivation. Now today, we're talking about Smyrna. This is the type of church we are to strive to be through the character that we maintain, personally, through the church, and collectively. Although both churches were given warnings, the interesting thing is Ephesus was warned about something they weren't doing right. Their motivation, their heart. Jesus was warning them about their heart and their motivation. Smyrna, on the other hand, is called the persecuted church. Remember, Ephesus was called the loveless church because they weren't doing everything out of a motivation for the love of Christ. And now they're gone. They're not there anymore. That whole area is gone. Smyrna, though, wasn't doing anything wrong. Jesus had no criticism for them. He just warned them to stand tall through the persecution they were suffering because of what Satan was doing to their church and where Satan was attacking them. And you got to remember, when we talk about these 7 cities, this was a world where Satan was winning, reigning in evil everywhere. And then Christ comes in, the gospel comes in, the crucifixion, salvation, the resurrection happens. And then his word starts popping up and taking control everywhere. But what he had to go against was evil in its most evil forms. And people say things like, I've heard people say, when you compare some of these cities, oh boy, that sounds like Las Vegas or some places on earth now. And the truth be told, they can't hold a candle to these cities because the things these people were doing were in public, in broad daylight. So they weren't going behind closed doors in seedy hotels or in penthouses and casinos. And this stuff was right out in the streets. And it was beyond the things that are happening now. It was a scary place. So we can learn from Smyrna what kind of church we should try to be, and that's what we're going to do. But this week we're going to do it a little different because this is the shortest letter. So we're going to read the letter twice. Last week I waited. We looked at the culture, then we looked at the church, and then we read the letter because the letter makes references that you can only fully understand when you know the culture in the church. This week we're going to do the same thing, but we are going to read the letter first. Here we go. You made it. All right. So here's the letter to Smyrna that Jesus had John send. And to the angel, which we know is pastor, to the angel of the church in Smyrna, write, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and come to life. I know your works, tribulation, and poverty. Poverty, by the way, I just got to say this real quick. In the original text, the word used for poverty isn't just poor. It was beat down, nothing left, rags on your back, nowhere to go, nothing to eat, destitute. It wasn't just, we think of poverty, we think of people who don't have much. It was an extreme poverty. He said, I know your works, tribulation and poverty, but you're rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but they're a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you're about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. So there's two themes prevalent throughout the letter to the church at Smyrna: staying faithful to authentic preaching and teaching, and as a result, staying faithful in the face of persecution, even until death. And this is where we got to put on our imagination hats, because we're going to look at Smyrna. And if you thought Ephesus was bad, Smyrna's right up there. Just got all these places were bad. Christ's word comes in and takes over. That's what Smyrna looked like. That's what it looked like in the heyday. It didn't always have a heyday, and we're going to talk about that too. Smyrna means myrrh. That's what they used on Jesus' body for anointing a dead body. It's aromatic, it's perfuming. Because that's where most of it came from. And they sold massive amounts of it from there to Egypt. It was the most beautiful city in that area. It was on the Aegean Sea. And this is what it looks like today. It's still there. Still got the red roofs. The camera angle is a little different. It's called Izmir. It's not Smyrna, but it's Izmir. It's still the same, and it's still there. And they're well aware of their history with Smyrna. That's a waterway system that's ancient. It says Smyrna in English, but that would have been in the Greek. They just did that on the stuff where they preserve it. And underneath the word Smyrna, it says agora. Agora means gathering place. So that water fountain is located at one of the agoras. They don't have like bars and social clubs. A gathering place. Like there was a club in Columbus where bands played called the Agora. And there's probably a bunch of them across the country, and they still even have the Roman roads there now. That's today. That's Izmir. Those are roads built by the Romans. You can see where they're gouged from chariots and horse hooves. And that street, I zoomed in there, but that street is a street that looks like here in Avis. I mean, there's houses up and down the street. But that Roman-built road is still there. So there's still elements of the ancient Smyrna everywhere. It was a center of science and medicine. And it was a free city, but they were fiercely, fiercely loyal to Rome and to Caesar. They were a stronghold city for worshiping the emperor. And we talked about that before with a lot of these cities. There were also, just like Ephesus, there were a ton of temples there to the gods Cybele, who we're going to talk about a lot, Apollo, Asclepius, Aphrodite, and Zeus. But this was the big one. Cybele, the patron goddess and guardian of Smyrna. And that's her temple there on the left. That's a painting of it. It's not a photograph. But she was the one who dominated all of the worship in Smyrna. And this is where things start to get really weird, really nasty. She was called the mother of all gods. And the citizens worshipped her by engaging in bloody ceremonies involving live bull sacrifices, animal sacrifices, bloodshed, all kinds of sensual activities, really depraved. So depraved that even Rome resisted allowing them to accept this Cybele worship as a god or goddess. So they eventually just relented and said, whatever. But the bloodshedding was the main thing, and self-mutilation. That's how they honored this god or goddess. You'll know why I say that in a second. But, actually, the reason is because Sybil was supposedly, obviously in mythology, born with male and female parts to Zeus. And Zeus was horrified, so he had the child, the male genitalia removed. So they could give her a female name, the goddess Sybil. That's what they did. And on March 24th every year, the biggest day to celebrate Sybil was called the Day of Blood. And the chief priestess, these were castrated transsexuals dressing as women who they worked so hard to get them as women, they would send them outside the city walls to make sure people couldn't tell they were ever a man. But they would go into the temple and cut their arms to draw blood and give their blood to Sybil in memory of her castration. And then they would play music, and people would gyrate and cut themselves and let their blood splash all over the altar to Sybil. I've never seen anything like that in Vegas. So, like I said, the world was really, really nasty back then. And this was considered the most sacred way of worshiping Sybil. Why do you have to talk about all this stuff? Because I need to give you an accurate picture of what was going on there. Because when you see the power of the presence of evil, but you see how Christ is able to overcome it, it's a pretty fascinating thing, the strength of God, the strength of Christ, rather, his words and his teachings. So the males were castrated to be priestesses for Sybil and dressed as women from that point after they were castrated. And it worked extremely well. And the transsexuals they had there also acted as mediums. They would contact spirits for Sybil, communicating with them. And just on a side note, transgenderism is nothing new. For people who think that that's new, that's not a new thing. Solomon told us, there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing pops up that hasn't been thought of or already done a lot worse in the Bible. And this culture absolutely hated Christians. They not only persecuted, killed, and tortured them, but they did it in the public square of the temple. That's the castration of one of the priestesses. That's the ceremony where they do this out in the courtyard for the worship of Sybil. And that is a man becoming, castrated over that dish. And I'm not going to go into the details of what's going on there, but you get a pretty good idea by looking at it. And one of the, like the other cities we talked about, these cultures also had to acknowledge God as Caesar. Remember we talked about that before in Ephesus. They would have to pinch incense and throw it in a burner whenever they went into a building to acknowledge that Caesar was God. And it was a little different in Smyrna because they were so fiercely loyal. You had to burn incense to Caesar, but you also had to get a certificate proving that someone witnessed you burning incense to Caesar yourself. If you didn't have it, you were in big, big trouble, because that's the highest law you could break, was not acknowledging Caesar as God. So despite all the debauchery, all this sickness and all this craziness in this beautiful, beautiful seaport city that is proud of itself, because there's still some good people there, they had a lot of pride. They had pride in their city. Like I said, not everyone took part in all these things. Small, modest town was what existed there across the bay. See, Smyrna, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but Smyrna started out as a tiny podunk village right there at the edge of the water, selling myrrh. That's how the whole place started out. And we're going to go back a little bit now. We're going to go back a little bit in history, because now you've got this picture, this grand place, these gods and goddesses, these temples, these perverted, bloodlust, letting, goddess worshiping things that they would do to people. Awful. But how did this all start? Okay, this all started, let me see if this is the right picture. Okay, we're going to start with this picture right here. Now, You see, I'm going to explain this. This fortress up front here, you get some size, look down there and see a person and a car, and you get an idea how big this is. Alexander the Great, whose name I told you is going to come up a lot in this series, fell asleep on that hill right there where that fortress is. Now, Smyrna, the podunk town, was across the water, right over there on the other side. He had a vision. He said he claimed gods or goddesses or something came to him in his sleep and told him he's going to rebuild it into a grand city. Well, the place across the way was getting clumpy and muddy and wasn't so good. So the first thing he did was he had his soldiers build this massive fortress, so he could oversee the city. And he did. He looked over the city and he watched them rebuild this into a massive, grand, extravagant place. Very a magnificent place that it is now. You saw in the old picture, because in 600 BC the old one was torn to the ground by a king called Attalus. It doesn't really matter, but what was already almost not there was gone until Alexander the Great came in and said he's going to build it. And it was peppered. So given everything I just told you, their whole history is peppered with these references over and over again in their literature, in their teachings, in their wall decorations that says they are the city that was once dead and now resurrected. They are the city that was dead and came back to life. That's how Smyrna would talk about themselves to other cities and visitors. Now, Jesus knows about this. He knows that's how they talk about themselves. He knows these terminologies. And we talk about these things because when we read the letters, some of it's going to come up and you go, okay, bear with me. He knows that's how they refer to their city. So he capitalizes on that when he has John write the letter. Now, we already read the letter, but we just talked about what kind of place we're looking at. Started out as a podunk place. Alexander the Great built it into a massive place. Then when Rome comes in, takes control, the debauchery of the people there takes over. But the church of Christ, is thriving despite this. Christians were hated. They were persecuted. That's a tunnel under the agora, the gathering place. So what you see to the left there, the sunlight, that wouldn't be there, because above those archways where you see that brick, that was all covered. This is underground. It would have been dark in there. They drug Christians down in there and beat them for fun if they saw them in the agora. Like now you see people beating up homeless people. They did that for fun. They would take them down in those tunnels and beat them. And we're going to talk about who the epitome of Smyrna was in terms of the battle, the fight for Christ. It was 50 years after John's death, and it was Polycarp. He was the bishop or the pastor of the church at Smyrna. He was burned alive at the age of 86 for refusing to renounce Jesus and worship Caesar. And now Polycarp knew John. That's him burning. Polycarp knew John. He was at least the 12th martyr to die in Smyrna. Polycarp was. He burned in 155 AD. And the fake Jews, like we read in the letter, called him an atheist. An atheist, of all things, for not declaring Caesar as God, and demanded that he be fed to the lions or burned up or stabbed or hung. They wanted him to where there's nothing left of his body, get rid of him. They don't want the Christians to even have his bones to pay respect to. It was now, this is the second thing that comes into play that's really important when we read the letter. When this happened, this is during the time of the games, like we think about the Olympics or what. In the ancient world, the games were important. The games in the Colosseums, the games in front of people. And they wanted entertainment, exciting, bloodlust, it could be sexual, anything that would titillate the crowd, they wanted it. So this is a perfect time to kill somebody during the games. Well, that's when this was all happening. They want Polycarp dead, executed, these fake Jews. Now, he did hide in a couple of places, and some little kid ratted him out. So they ended up finding him. When he was arrested, the soldiers who showed up to arrest Polycarp, he made them dinner. He fed them. They didn't want to hurt him. They liked him. Everybody liked him. Why? Because he was a nice guy. Why? Because he was a Christian. The soldiers knew him. They liked him. They didn't want to hurt him. Like, man, don't do this. And he made them dinner. And even their superior officer begged him, look, just say you don't believe in Jesus. That's all you got to do. We don't want to hurt you. We like you, man. They liked him. It was like they were begrudgingly arresting him. Everybody liked him. Polycarp's famous words are, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? Talking about Jesus. This is from a book. I'm going to go ahead and read it. I don't know the author's name. The Story of Civilization, Caesar and Christ. This section is on Caesar and Christ. The opposition to the new religion, that's Christianity, came rather from the people than from the state. The magistrates were often men of culture and tolerance, but the mass of the pagan population resented the aloofness, superiority, and certainty of the Christians and called upon the authorities to punish these atheists for insulting the gods. It was bloodlust amongst the people. The Jews did that to Jesus. These are fake Jews, meaning they're not really Jewish. They're not practicing any faith. They're only Jewish by their nationality. The ones who are, they just don't like Christians. Who does? When you live in filth and sin and darkness, you don't want people that make you feel convicted. That happens now, doesn't it? You ever been around somebody says, oh man, those Christians are stuck up and uppity and think they're better than me. And no, we don't. I mean, that's you being convicted of something you're doing wrong. If you're around a Christian and you feel bad about what you're doing, it's not because the Christian's pointing their finger at you. The Bible says that'll happen. It's called letting your light shine. When you're around people and they can tell you're a Christian, they're convicted about what they're doing, so they immediately start calling you a snob. Christians don't think they're better than other people. They just know they're better than who they used to be. I've said that 100 times. So when they threatened him with burning alive, Polycarp said, you threaten me with a fire that burns for a time and is quietly quenched. You do not know the fire that awaits the wicked in judgment to come and in everlasting punishment. Why are you waiting? Do what you will. That's what he told them. Bring it on. Do it. Let's do this. He didn't budge. Polycarp, remember what we're talking about here. We talked about the culture. Now we're talking about the church. Polycarp was a reflection of what the church at Smyrna was like. Do what you will. Come take me. I'm not budging to my Savior, my King. So they did. They brought firewood enthusiastically. They couldn't stand his tranquility. He was loosely bound. They tried to nail him to a post. And he said, get those nails away from me. You don't have to. I'm not going to run. Here. They tied him like a sheep. Like when you sacrifice a sheep. They tied his hands. He didn't try to get away. He said, just do it. And then there's other myths attached to this, which I'm sure aren't true, but they're interesting stories. Because they stabbed him too when he was up there. And they said a dove flew out when they cut him. I don't believe that. And they said he bled so much that it put out the flames and they had to light it again. I don't know if that's true either. Those sound more like myth. But they did burn him and stab him. They burned him. The stabbing's not really completely verified, but it's pretty reliable sources. They did it. They brought the firewood. The large Jewish community were very hostile to all these Christians. There were, like I said, these Jews were the ones Jesus is calling fake Jews. They're heathens. And they teamed up with other pagan heathens to gang up on the Christians. They want them all put to death. The goal was to stamp out Christianity. Because of what I said, Christianity always convicts sinners. They hate it. They hate it. Now, if you think about that, if you allow the gospel, when you think about stamping out Christianity, you look at what happened then in Smyrna and think about how it should happen and how it does happen now. It should be like trying to stamp out a grease fire. It should spread and jump and move around to more places, which is what it did. Because that's what truth does. It shows up to all the parties it wasn't invited to. And when you try to stamp out the truth, it spreads like a grease fire. And that's why Smyrna is still standing today. Judaism, rejecting the Messiah, became a powerful tool for Satan to use against the Christian church. The synagogue of Satan brought much persecution. So these fake Jews, so what these Jews would do, they would say, oh, they're atheists because they don't recognize Caesar as God. They make stuff up about Christians too. They said they have orgies and they're cannibals. They eat flesh and they drink blood because of the Last Supper. Because they take the words from the Last Supper where Jesus said, this is my body given up for you. So they're telling people they're a cult and they're cannibals and they eat people and they drink their blood. And people are like, what? These people, look at them. They're filthy. They ain't got no money. They're disgusting. Beat them, kill them, get them. That was their attitude. And then they'd talk about love in Christ. And Polycarp reflected the church. He fed the people that came to Christ. They're like, there's nothing wrong with these people. Maybe they got something going. No, kill them. That's what Satan wants to do. Kill them. I'm going to go all the way back to slide 2 again, if this will work, so we can, because now that we know something about the culture, now that we know something about the church, we're going to read this again. And there's even more I'm going to recap on after this. Okay? To the angel of the church of Smyrna, write, these things, says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. Right? Hey, this is really who did die and come to life. This isn't a city that had more houses built. This is from the one who did die and come back to life. That's the relevance of him using that. I know your works, tribulation and poverty, and I know the blasphemy of those who say they're Jews and are not. He knows they're out there, that Christians are having orgies and cannibals and they're blaspheming God. They're a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear those things which you're about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, so you'll be tested. They did with Polycarp. And you'll have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death. And I will give you, and I'm going to touch on this right now, the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. So this persecution thing, just like the world's hostility towards God now was then. You believe in Jesus? I don't want you here. I want you dead. Jesus is using the truth of he being the one that came back to life from death, not a town. This was encouraging to them, not to be afraid. Because he's like, oh, wow, that's what they say about our town. But he is the one. Just he said the same thing in Matthew. Matthew 10:28. Don't be afraid of those who can kill the body but can't kill the soul. But be afraid of the one who can destroy both in hell. Being me. I mean, Christ meaning himself. So how do we be faithful until death? Well, Jesus was instructing the church at Smyrna to avoid allowing themselves to be weakened. That churches do now. And did back then. They knew what to avoid. But like Polycarp, they knew the pain of the first death meant nothing in contrast to the life to come in heaven. That's the eternal perspective. You always hear me say up here, maintain the eternal perspective. And when we have the eternal perspective, fear shrinks and cowers away from us instead of taking over. You heard about Polycarp, how he died. I heard a story one time, a pastor who, he was visiting this lady, I wrote her name, it's just her first name, Mary Sue, in church, in the hospital. She was sick. She was really, really bad. And she had left him a message saying things were better. So when he got to the hospital, he got off the elevator and went down to her room and looked at her, and she looked worse. She looked way worse. And so he went over to her and he said, Mary Sue, I'm glad to see you. And I heard you had good news. And she said, I do. I'm going to be with my Lord in about, what did she say, 2 months sooner than I thought. It could be any day. And he said, that's the good news. And she said, yes, I'm going to be with my Lord sooner. Now, there's a discussion, and I've talked about this before too, that pastors have, because I'm well acquainted with death and with being around people who are dying and right there at the door. And, the saying is this: Christians die better. They don't pound their fist yelling at the nurse, threatening to sue the hospital in a rage of anger because it's somebody else's fault that they're sick and dying. They don't. They accept the embrace of God, of Christ. They have a peaceness overcome them. And pastors, and I myself have seen it, And it sounds like a harsh phrase, but it's not. Christians die better. And Polycarp did just that. Philippians says, for me to die is gain, to live is Christ, to die is gain. 1 Corinthians 15:55, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? So you go back in this letter and talk about these hard times, right? I know your tribulation. That word, tribulation, like I talked about poverty, the Greek word used for that, it meant to be crushed by stones. So it wasn't just like we hear tribulation, but, ooh, hard times. No, there's a strong emphasis on how hard the times are. It's being crushed to death with the word's thalipsis. It means to be crushed with rocks. So when he says, I know your tribulation, look, I know they're killing you, they're beating you, and they're burning you alive. Jesus wasn't saying, I know you're going through hard times. He was going, I know your thalipsis, you're crushing death. Well, I know what they're doing to you. And this, I said I'd get back to this crown of life. Crown of life. Okay, so we saw Jesus address this whole, I think I'm the one who was dead and came back to life. We saw that in the beginning of the letter. That's why it means more, because we know what's going on. The game, or what's happening in the culture, them advertising themselves as a city that was dead and then resurrected. This crown of life, since it was during the games, this isn't the kind that royalty wears. That's what they would give to the athletes. They would get a crown for, hey, you're the best wrestler, you're the best shot putter, you're the best spear thrower, whatever it was. Whatever they want. They would get a crown, and it would be inscribed on it, but recognizable by the color of what the crown was for. During the games. That's when they kill Polycarp. During the time of entertainment. The Christian persecutions. That's why Jesus says, hey, I'll give you the crown of life. Not a crown played in a game for persecuting my people. For the tribulation, I will give you the crown of life. So that's the significance of him saying the crown of life. People just think, oh, that sounds nice. A king crown, and I get to live forever. No, there's a very specific thing. He was very intentional that he said that for that reason. And people were familiar with the crowns. They were familiar with the games. They're hearing these things like, boy, he's being very specific to us, isn't he? He's the one who came back to life. He knows tribulation. He knows they're killing us. He'll give us the crown of life. Smyrna was not warned about anything they were doing wrong. He had nothing against them. They were only warned about the attacks of the enemy. The life application: when we become friendly with a culture that practices an abomination before God and those who posture in false belief, like these fake Jews in the courtyard participating in these horrible worship services to Sybil, but then we lack the testicular fortitude to turn away from it, to have the guts for the multitude of reasons. And people do that all the time. They get out with people and they're like, well, they're nice people. Or, I don't want to judge. It's not me. I know him. He's a good person. It is what it is. Okay. Remember, the Bible says someday he's going to say, depart from me. I never knew you. This is what happened to the church at Ephesus. They forgot their first love. See, when our kids see us tolerate sin, they learn it's okay. It's okay. Mom, Dad says it's all right. It's okay. When Jesus tells us to remain faithful until the end, he's telling us not to compromise with a worldly culture that stands in direct opposition to him. So, and I know people, their kid's gay. So they say, it's all right. My kid's gay. It's why gay. I'm not going to stop loving them. I'm not going to stop loving my kid. They're gay. I should accept it. It's all right. It is what it is. Nice person, good kid. Okay, let me clear something up right now. I'm not saying to hate gay people. I'm not saying to hate your kid if your kid's gay. I'm not saying to hate anybody. What I am saying is we are all sinners. Every single person's a sinner. Your kid is too. I don't care what the sin is. Every person is a sin. You can go through life two ways. You can go through life saying, I'll live on my own pride. I don't need Jesus, and be a sinner. Or you can go through your life as a sinner and every day wake up and go, I need Jesus. I need Jesus today. I need Jesus every day. I don't want people to disown their own family, go out and ridicule people, call them names, spread hate. That's not what Jesus did. That's not what I'm advocating either. People say that though. Like they lied about Smyrna. They go out into the world. Christians hate gay people. No, we don't. Man, I was in theater and music for years. A bunch of my friends now I know are still gay. I don't hate them. I'm still friends with them. I don't focus on other people's sins, but I teach my child, this is a sin, this is not a sin, this is a sin, this is not a sin. We're all sinners, we all need Jesus. Right? Agreed? Amen? Amen. So, we can't compromise. Just because I do something wrong doesn't mean I'm going to join a club to where we go out and tell the whole world it's great. I do it wrong, it feels good, and you should condone it. I'm not just talking about being gay. I'm talking about any sin in our heart. We're going to go through this life as sinners. We can go through on our own pride and burn, as the Bible tells us, or we can go through admitting we're a sinner every day and need Christ by accepting what he's done for us. That's the life application. Ephesus is gone. Jesus said, I'll take your lampstand from you. And they were doing everything right, remember? They just weren't doing out of their love for him. And it's gone. We saw, listen, Smyrna is still there. And it's thriving in a mostly Muslim population. They're still suffering tribulation. They're still being persecuted over there. They haven't forgot who they are. They write in English, Smyrna, on the drains. They leave the Roman roads like, we know who we are. And they're going to stay that way. They're thriving. They're a big city now in the midst of all that, still being persecuted, still listening to Christ. That's what we should strive to be. All right.